Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Talent pathways. How do we move from point A to point B to point C inside of an organization? And as we're looking at our organizations from the executive level, and specifically focusing on, are our people in the right seat, in the right role, and are they in the right role for where the company is going to grow? So welcome to Talent Optimization. Today we have Amy Stalker with us. Amy is a total rewards professional, and she's worked on both a US base and globally. And so, Amy, what are your specific thoughts on how we move individuals through the organization? And welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Tracy. And good question, right? I have a ton of thoughts on how you move. I think you can there's always a traditional method, right? Which I think we're all super experienced with. That you come in a role, that specific titled role, that you do that role, and then you work towards trying to move up into a managerial pathway or to an individual contributor pathway, whatever it may be. And it's kind of old. This is where we get burned out. This is where we don't always learn. We get siloed in our careers often. We get highly specialized at times. And once that happens, it's hard to really break through into other functions or into other parts of a business, if you will. So kind of been kicking around, and in my career have developed what we call like service delivery systems. And what that really is it's making sure that you have people of all different types of talent, whether it's managerial talent, whether it's specialist talent, whether it's generalist talent, especially in HR, and really looking at what are their strengths. So everybody has strengths and weaknesses. Nobody should be ashamed of having certain weaknesses, but it's how you develop and test and get those known. And you start bringing them together in a talent pool, if you will. And what you could do from there is that you hire people into this talent pool and you start pulling them for projects versus them being, I'm an HR generalist and this is what I do, right? In a certain role, you start putting them in, I'm a service delivery expert and I'm working on this project. And it's a myriad of different ones that cross across all different functions. So it could be finance, HR, IT, manufacturing, whatever it may be, to better a business and to grow. So in that aspect, what you're doing is you're helping them not only become, professionals, maybe in an HR function, but you're also giving them a pathway to other business leaders, pathway into how the business works. I think HR a lot of times is sometimes we don't always put the business first, and that's what we need to do. And that's what makes HR leaders really good leaders and makes them evolve and grow. And I think just what I've done in my career is by building the service delivery type model, it's really been super successful and it's been emulated then globally. Wow, you really got something good over here. People are engaged, high engagement scores. The ability to work with people that they normally don't work with. And it really helps to build their skills and gets them excited about different opportunities. So they're not just siloed into one role.
Absolutely. And what I love about this framework is you're having individuals focus on different areas of the business, and they're taking that with them as they move between different project teams. One of the things that I hear, and sometimes I hear my listeners talking in my head, and one of the questions that I hear is, yeah, Tracy, but how do you do that in a smaller organization? That sounds great in a large organization. How do you do it in a smaller one? And I have an organization that I'm working with right now. It's about 100 employees, and they have a group of individuals that they're essentially are on a team, but they're rotating between different areas of the business. Because what we know is, let's just talk from HR for a second. HR doesn't always understand what the business objectives are. Well, when you bring somebody from an operations role into an HR director role, guess what? They're bringing with them the specific knowledge of the business and what's been happening there. And so I think that there's definitely ways to do it, especially if you have, service delivery teams, or if you have a team that is counselors or whatnot, and you have them siloed into different divisions based on the contract, it's really easy to move them in that based on teams and coming in and out of those teams.
It is. And I think it's important. And even for small organizations, there's a way to do it. You're never going to have everybody raising their hand saying, yes, this is for me. I want to be in a project role. I want to be able to do different parts of the business. You are going to have people who are like, you know what? No, I only like to do this. And this is what I want to stay in. And there's nothing wrong with that. You do need to have the doers that keep the lights on, if
Absolutely.
you will, and the tactical employees and the employees that kind of sit in that area and they're comfortable there. But if you don't have that base of service delivery, isn't going to work because that needs to happen. You can't let the business fall. But it's those big projects that we all do and we have them. And it's just making sure that you have the right teams. Like, I mean, I'll raise my hand and say, I'm a great big picture thinker. You know, I'm an eye in the disc, if you will. I'm like, yeah, let's go. I'm a motivator. But I tend to, I throw out all the big ideas and then I'm like, okay, now somebody else go implement it for me.
Exactly.
Because that's not where I'm at in my career and it's not what I want to do. But that doesn't mean that somebody else on the team doesn't then pick it up in the middle or pick it up at the end and then do and get it finished and take it to the finish line where everybody's a winner. It's been really super successful. I hope that it just continues to grow.
Absolutely. And one of the key things that we're working with, so Predictive Index came out with a design module last year. And one of the key things it really does is you build your teams out, and your teams are built out based on what is our team type right now, right? Are we a pathways team, meaning, hey, we're figuring out where to go, but we're not going to be great implementers, right? Or are we, a strategic team where we can do the really strategic things, but we really need somebody to lead us, right? And so when we develop those teams, we need to know, what does the organization need this team to execute on and to deliver on? And then we can really look and see who's sitting on this team. Where's our gaps? Because that allows us to do a fit gap analysis to say, hey, we actually don't have a balance around this team. So, for example, if we have several individuals on a team that are big picture thinkers, we don't have anyone that's implementing. We need to have at least one implementer on our team to really implement and make that thing happen. And this is where I think this becomes gold in organizations, is we're going to hire into project teams. We're going to see where it goes based on what we need to execute on. And then we kind of move to the next project.
Yeah, and I think that you have a really good point. And it's always been kind of a joke with us when I'm developing this team is to say we need a dating app, right? But for talent.
We have it.
We have it. And it sounds like you do. And that's a big need and a gap in delivering this type of a pathway or a way to do things in an organization or even a structure. That's the piece that's missing. If you know the people, you know what they're good at, you know their strengths, you know their weaknesses, but we don't always know what we're hiring in for. We don't always know, is this going to be successful? And so you can swipe right, swipe left, right? Like, okay,
right.
That's a good fit for this one, but no, it's not a good fit for this one. And you start really blending in what makes people motivated, right? Like most of us don't want to do things we're not good at. There's things that I don't necessarily want to do that you still have to do in an organization or your job, right? And that's fine. But what then keeps you happy and what keeps you at a company and what keeps you going and growing and learning? And it's doing things like this that are like, oh, I'm really passionate about this. I'm really good at this. I'm a great resource builder or a great influencer. I would love to just do this on different projects and jump and learn more about the business. I mean, how great is that? Who doesn't want to work in that environment?
And what's really great about this is we talked a couple of weeks ago about communication that drives results. And when we talk about that communication, when we build these project teams, what really happens is we're building trust and relationships so that no matter where those individuals go, you've spent a good 12, 18 months together. You've got trust that I can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, what's specifically going on with this where I may not have done that otherwise. And that's a key communication piece.
Oh, it definitely is. And you have to give people the opportunity to opt out, if that makes sense, because one project isn't for everybody. I've had it a couple of times where I've had people be put into a project because they had a certain skill set and then they start the project and it's like, you know what, this just isn't for me. Is there somebody else that could fill the role? How can I transition back out of this? And you have to be able to have that, like, some things are going to fail or some projects may start failing, but you need to fail fast and you need to accept it, own it, and turn it around and find somebody else in that role or maybe even tweak the project a bit. And these are just growing pains that I think organizations are going to go through as this model starts building. I think it's out there. People are starting to talk more about it. It's just people are scared. How do I make this a reality?
Right.
And hearing you talk about PI, them having that tool, I think that's a huge, huge beginning, because that's usually where we get stuck.
Right, because that's our easy button, right? We can really easily look at and say, okay, who do we need to either hire in or pull up from our bench in order to do this? And that gives huge opportunities. And of course, we would always rather, bring somebody internally, because that's how we build those talent pathways, is when we can do that internally, because then we can keep great talent. The key is that, we've got 4 levers of engagement. One is fit to role. The second is the team that we're on. The third is our manager. And the fourth is the environment or the culture that we're working in. And when we build these team-based environments, we're taking care of several of those at the same time.
Oh, absolutely you are. And I like to hear that those are the thoughts, that you're going through as you're thinking through organization and organizational change. I think those are definitely key, and employees want to hear that. And they want to hear, how do I grow? That's usually one of the first questions we get is, well, I'm not really in a role per se, so I'm not going to be a manager, or I'm not going to be a director of whatever. And we have to let go of those titles, right? Like, I think titles for us, and especially in some global regions, it's very important. Mm-hmm. And in this model, you have to be okay with, not having this grand title necessarily, but it's more about what the work and what you're doing, and to be able to explain that and really love what you're doing and be engaged in what you're doing. And when you find people who equally, want to problem solve, I've seen it grow, and I've seen so many people knock on my door saying, how do I get into your function? How do I get into this group?
Right.
Because I hear great things about it. And that's what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's huge for where are we going next and what does that look like? But it also plays to the different behavior types that an individual has, right? So if we have somebody that's incredibly extroverted and has an ego, and guess what? There's jobs that are needed for that. But this may not be the right one for that, but they might be a great balancer on a team.
Yeah, it's like I had somebody utilize kind of the rummage sale, right? Is how do you put on a really good rummage sale? You need a certain person to go out and sell it, and to do all the art around it, and to do the postings and all of that things. You need this background person to say, okay, this is the date. Here's everything that we're selling. Here's all the price points. Like, you need to have all of these different pieces. You need somebody to go out and talk to, the people who are coming up, and to take the money and be comfortable with that. You need all of these pieces in order for a rummage sale to really go well.
Right.
And I know it's kind of cliche or kind of funny to talk about it, but it's so true when you think about, like, what part could I play in the rummage sale piece? It's definitely, for me, not going to be pricing everything. That's not my thing, or developing what dates it is. I'm like, you pick a date, you tell me when to be there. I'll go out and I'll sell it. I'll talk to the people. I'll do that kind of stuff. But I mean, you get the opposite, right? And it takes a lot of people to have a project be successful.
Absolutely. And those balancing pieces are key. So I'm super curious, what is one key takeaway for our executive listeners today?
Yeah. So I think, in this conversation, it's to not be afraid to push this model. I think that's the biggest holdback in this really being successful. It's try it, even try it with a small team, or, a couple of different projects, but give it some time for it to take. Don't be afraid to take that risk and to start building this within your organization. It's definitely an up and coming trend. I've seen it be super successful in my area of expertise.
Absolutely. And what is your key takeaway for our HR professionals?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can say the same thing for HR professionals, but it's look at people who are not necessarily like you. I think a lot of times when we interview people to come and join our organizations, we're always talking about fit, and we're talking about culture fit. It's okay for them not to necessarily be a fit or a culture fit, because they're bringing a different way of thinking, and it's not groupthink, and it's not the same type of think. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, how do you better onboard them? How do you bring them into the organization? They have a different way of working. That's actually beneficial for this model.
And that's huge. And we have 4 podcasts specifically on onboarding, and those are numbers 10 through 13. So if you're curious of knowing a little bit more about that, those, specifically dig into it. And the podcast we did with Kristen Robertson from Predictive Index really goes into, hey, what are the different ways to do that based on a person's behavioral type, for sure. So thank you so much for being on our podcast for a second time. And with that, if you're really curious about this teams model and, hey, how do I design my dream teams? And, do we potentially want to play with moving to this type of model where we're hiring into a project team versus into an individual role, again, you need to make sure you've got great communication so individuals aren't afraid at the end of that 18 months that they're going to lose their job. But if you're really curious about that, in our show notes, you can go ahead and take the predictive index behavioral assessment, and then we can walk through those teams with you. And if you want to follow Amy, you can go ahead and find her on LinkedIn. And with that, thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.